This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in the change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity.
Welcome everyone back to Leadership Beyond. We are pleased to welcome Eric Zemaitaitis, who is a very good friend of mine, former colleague, and a regional director of HR in healthcare. He was one of the contributors to the quotes around reimagining HR that we solicited a while back, and he had such compelling things to share that we wanted to get him on video with us and have a conversation about it. So Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Cool. Yeah, it's nice to see you again, Adrienne.
So one of the quotes that you shared was around this idea of how organizations put the onus of leadership development squarely on HR, on formal HR roles, and the struggles that creates and the challenges that it creates when you are maybe one HR person for a couple hundred leaders and managers and not being able to really get to the development that you know is needed and is wanted. So let's just start there, and could you just kind of share a little bit about your experience around the troubles in relying on HR to do all of that leadership development for the organization?
Yeah, thanks, Adrienne. It's nice hearing the quote, because even though I was going to say like, oh, it sounds really good, but it is something that I've always, and it doesn't matter if it was back, in consulting or where I'm now in healthcare, people are people wherever. And I think I find the same thing with leaders as well. HR is there to help support and help guide the way. And even with my background being in leadership development, I love helping out the leaders and leading sessions and creating sessions, even though it may be beyond the scope of my role, but I like doing it because I know the value that the leaders find in it. They can be a stronger manager, stronger leader to help develop their associates. However, and like you said in the quote, if I'm just one person, not just me, any HR partner, HR leader, whatever it may be, they can only do so much. So I always feel if I'm going to work like in healthcare, right, I'm going to work with directors of nursing, with directors of diagnostic imaging, or even let's say the C-level suite, if I'm able to help them prepare better so they can actually sort of own the leadership development of their staff underneath them and their leaders that report up through them, then I feel there's much better staying power versus I come in, I do blah, blah, blah. And then let's say they do improve, which would be great, but then all of a sudden they're not getting that continuous support and development from their one-up or their, sort of chain of command that way.
What conversations do you think are missing on the front end before a lot of budget and say, here, train these people, whether they're high potential new hires? What conversations need to happen cross-functionally to make it more strategic?
Yeah, I do think with the conversations that happen at the business level, I'll say, or operationally, I feel they need to understand that's part of their core job. To be a leader, this is what you need to do. Obviously, it's to be operational strong, don't get me wrong, especially in healthcare. I want them to be super strong operational to make sure surgeries go smoothly, or whatever types of procedures or the average daily census in the hospital is taken care of appropriately. But I don't know if the right expectation setting is occurring. So it could be budgeting, right? Do you have enough, and I hate to say this sometimes, do you have enough leaders on your team? So they can help support, especially if you have multiple shifts as well, with healthcare being 24/7 all the time. Those are things that we really have to focus on. But I do look specifically at, do leaders understand that's part of their responsibility of being a people leader? Of course, operationally, you want them to be leading the operation side, but we even look at different models to say, if you're a people leader, here's the focus percentage you should be working on the people side of things. Here's a percentage you should be working on the operational side. I do think a lot of the times you want business to continue, so not just with healthcare. So more of that focuses operationally, and sometimes, and also that probably comes more naturally to them, and not as much focus is put on the leadership side of things.
I think also, just as if you were to come in and do, a leadership development, skills training, or Tom, either one of you, Tom coming in and he's an external consultant, there was budget found. And so he comes in and he teaches, pick one, conflict management or something, a leadership skill, and then goes away. And then there's no one now creating the support. And so similarly, if HR is doing that, coming in, teaching, going away, there's no support. Where, could there be communities of practice where you're starting to kind of get within that organization where you've provided the skills, but then there's still an opportunity to continue to reinforce and develop outside of the HR or the external trainer that came in to do the initial delivery?
I like the idea of communities of practice so they have somewhere to go to. But what I've been doing is I'm creating these bi-monthly leadership sessions that start actually, well, I didn't start. I like to create the dates first, and I'll create the program. I work best under pressure, I think. Some people call it procrastination, but in this situation, though, part of the sessions that I create include what do we want, or how can we help the leaders understand, okay, we're going to teach a lot of people and have these good experiences in the training session or the leadership development session, but how do we help those leaders continue the conversation? So it's not just, here you go, and then even though I am stepping away, I'm always used as a resource, but how can they make it stronger from their perspective? And we see that with charge nurses, right? In frontline leadership type of a position, they're with the associates and the clinicians the most that are closest to the patient, so closest to our customer. How much support are they getting? So we look at a structure of let's say a director, a manager, maybe a supervisor, you have charge nurses, any type of leadership structure that way. How are we really arming our managers and directors appropriately to help develop those charges, or whatever it might be, supervisor role, that like frontline manager type role?
And who owns those questions? I mean, that's really the driver in that quote. We all have to own them if we're going to create a culture where we don't just focus on competence. We don't want to lose the competence. And so that operational versus people development thing, it needs to be less of a versus and part of the same thing. Yes.
100%. That's when I first heard, I'm glad you mentioned that, Tom, because when I first heard someone say, hey, what's the percentage we work at with this and this? I'm thinking, it's all 100%. You have to get everything done. But I understand, especially in certain situations when they work so operationally, and we've seen in every role, in Adrienne, back when, it doesn't matter if we're in customer service or payroll or wherever at Hewitt or Aon, there's situations in which you're a really good doer, and then all of a sudden, oh, congratulations, now you're the leader of these doers. You're thinking, holy crud, what do I do? And that's a good place to start, but at least having that training that supports it. To, I guess, elaborate to what you talked about with who owns it, and obviously we know both parties own it, but my executive teams that I support two different executive teams. I'm able to be successful in my role because they're bought into it. It's not like it's my idea to do all this. It's they come to me and say, Eric, me as the chief nursing officer, the chief operating officer, I want to do X, Y, Z. Here's what I can do to help my leadership team, but we need your support with blah, blah, blah. And usually that is that leadership development side. That's where we see it really mesh well together and work well. Now, it's not all sunshine and butterflies all the time, obviously, because we're working, especially in healthcare with COVID and staffing challenges and those types of things, almost like every organization, but just more critical when you're dealing with people's lives versus consulting or whatever other industry that people are in.
So speaking of COVID, what are the new challenges? And since we've made a distinction between the operational challenges and the human development challenges, and we're saying we want to bridge that, in this new reality, where is some opportunity to get what you've always believed even deeper in the organization?
Yeah, I think it's the continued partnership. I mean, COVID threw everyone a huge curveball. And even though I have friends and family that don't work in healthcare, right? I know a lot of people that work in healthcare in leadership positions, but a lot of my friends and family don't work in healthcare. And when I saw things they got thrown for a loop outside of healthcare, and healthcare, which is, I'm super impressed, they keep on working. Like, they know, even though COVID is brand new, but when you talk about, especially with some of the more experienced clinicians, when they talked about, even back then when it was SARS or other types of illnesses or, infections that come through, even when you compare it to like TB patients, and I know it's not a fair comparison with it, but there's still isolation procedures and protocols that you have to follow and things that sort of come out of the blue. How do you handle this? How do you handle that? It's the flexibility. And that's one thing that I knew healthcare clinicians and leaders were flexible. Maybe I didn't understand how flexible they would be, but that makes it challenging as well, because some people are saying, I don't want to work in healthcare, or I don't want to work in an acute care facility like where I sit. I'd rather work in a doctor's office, or maybe at an organization that's more on the pharmaceutical side or insurance company side as a nurse, versus actually having that acute care experience right on the front lines that way. One piece that I think got a little bit more challenging, not more challenging, but that we're seeing is, how were we able to be flexible when it comes to workplace flexibility, right? A lot of places can say, and even Adrienne, we were chatting before the recording started about working from home. I'm in my office. I've worked from home probably, I don't know, 10 days maybe in the last 18 months, which I could have. I like being here. I like being here with the action, especially since I'm part of the executive team. It's nice to be with them as they're meeting and so on. But of course, there's positions that never were virtual before or remote in healthcare that some did become remote. We thought, oh, this is interesting. It can work this way. And Adrienne, going way back when, I used to tell, I tell the story. I worked from home, since 2005. Oh my gosh, cutting edge, But it's different in healthcare, and I don't know if it always has to be different. But the partnership and the flexibility from the executive teams, and there's growth that had to happen there as well. But it's really just partnering with the leadership teams and making sure that they have a good understanding. We do a lot of surveys, a good understanding from the frontline staff to the supervisors to the managers, et cetera, to make sure everyone's on the same page, especially since so much is changing. Even still with COVID, numbers are increasing a little bit. Hopefully not like the rest of the country here in Illinois, but it is on the uptick, which is scary, seeing some of our positives and PUIs increasing as well.
So many of the things that you shared, Eric, remind me back to just the guiding principles of change management.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Where you're talking about, understanding where people are, some idea or vision of where they're going, right? Where we need to go, understanding how to get there and starting to shape that. But then also, I think the key piece, and in all kinds of change, this is the piece that we forget or we fail at time and time again, and that is the reinforcement.
Yeah.
So sure, you go out, you do the thing, you get people there, and then you go away. And I think the key message that I'm hearing is you can't go away. So maybe it starts with HR, but what you're doing in building the biweekly program, and little by little shifting to, now this is the business owned or the staff owned endeavor, and your support can lighten because they're becoming more confident and comfortable, and then now it's becoming more part of their DNA. And that's exactly what change management is, right? It's not just figure it out, go get there and leave. It's that continuous reinforcement until that becomes, and I hate to say the new normal because we won't go there. It's a whole different topic.
Right.
But the new way of doing things. And I think in healthcare especially, another key competency of leadership is that I imagine is seen time and time again is resilience.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's been, I'm just not saying it because I'm in healthcare, but since I see it every day, especially when, back in March of 2020, where, even though we weren't as busy hospital-wise with number of total patients, a lot of people weren't going to the hospital for elective surgeries, et cetera, the acuity of the patients were sky high. And now the challenge that a lot of healthcare organizations and hospitals face, you have now increasing numbers, knock on wood, we'll get more control of it, but we have increasing numbers, but our hospitals are busy, so we've been at peak census the last few days, which is, I hate to say it this way, good business wise, right? People are having surgeries, they're getting taken care of, they're taking care of their health. And we want to do these types of procedures and so on and help people for the community, because it helps out regardless if it's my hospital or my health system or the neighboring one that's a quote unquote competitor. But as we all provide excellent care to patients and their families, that's good for the community. But I think a big piece that you hit on, Adrienne, that is eye-opening for me over and over again is that resilience. The clinicians, they're rock stars. I mean, it's really impressive with what they do day in and day out, but we owe them, I guess, to help develop and have the strongest leaders as possible. So even though I do fairly frequent leadership sessions for our leaders, one thing I do is I put reminders in my calendar to say, hey, remind leaders about blah, 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 and, reach out, send these, we have these things that are like kudos cards, send 10 out before you leave on Friday, or start the week, I sent one this morning, start the week off strong with sending some out. So it's just basic stuff that they do for recognition. We have some pretty decent recognition programs. However, I feel the best recognition is what I call innate leadership. It's the day-to-day stuff that people do, that leaders do, that if they come across as genuine and always focus on being positive, obviously there's going to have those constructive conversations, but even if someone's going into a patient room together, you see them do something well, provide that positive feedback, because that's recognition on the spot there. That doesn't have to be some big program someone rolls out with all these bells and whistles. It's just being a good people leader.
So continuous small reinforcements rather than big events is definitely the way of it. It's a leadership journey, not a leadership seminar. And the golden rule still works after all these years. Catch them doing things right, and then proof works in the favor of what you want more of. And our tendency, if we're not careful, is to catch them when they slip and reinforce that. So good for you for having that kind of a support in place, and that'll make a huge difference over time.
And it's I hate to say, because I don't want to minimize anything, but it is very basic leadership. But I don't want to minimize it and say, oh, everyone should know how to do this, because not just they, but anyone who is being in a role that they were strong individual contributors, we all know it's a different skill set to be a strong leader. And some people can do it naturally. And it's like, wow, it's phenomenal. You can see them turn like their peers, and then all of a sudden they become a leader of a peer, and it just works out beautifully. I think those are rare, but when we like to use those as models in situations to really work through situations that can help more junior or more inexperienced leaders sort of grow. But that's where I really feel I can say stuff till I'm blue in the face. And I actually like to lead the development sessions, and I think I do a good job at it. However, it does stop with me unless I help prepare those leaders to actually help grow them. Because we always say, if you're able to grow your staff that report up through you, and you can have them grow into leadership positions, and some people want to stay in their level of the role, which is perfectly fine. We need strong individual contributors, but we just need to know where people want to go. And if they want to go in a certain direction, how can we help support them to get them there? And I think in healthcare, we're a little bit behind with the really creating those leadership journeys to move people along. We're doing a lot better at it, I think, as of late. But I think a lot of organizations are challenged in that area. I think we were spoiled way back when, Adrienne, with the kind of stuff that we do in consulting.
Yeah, a bit of trailblazers where we came from, right?
Oh, I know. And I thought, oh my gosh, every organization's like this. I know.
Right. But I think, for me, the key takeaways, just as we start to wrap up this session, is that it doesn't need to take a formal program. It doesn't necessarily need to take a lot of lift, because when you're successful, it's really embedding this within all levels of the organization, so that these practices become just part of your cultural thread, right? And we will talk more about culture, one of our other key topics in Leadership Beyond, right? And we have a culture expert to bring onto a panel discussion. But I think, Eric, thank you for sharing your experiences and your ideas. I'm hoping that for this community, we maybe broke down some things and provided some ideas where you can just get started, right? And what do you say, Tom? Start small. Remind us.
Think big, even bigger. Start small, even smaller. Keep moving.
Right.
My axiom.
Keep moving. And Eric, I see you doing that. You're finding a way to bring it into the organization in a way that's manageable. And before you know it, hopefully it just becomes more part of the cultural thread.
Yeah, just baby steps that we have to take. And obviously, as we help people be better leaders, it's going to be best for everyone. So I appreciate the time.
And I just want to encourage, before we wrap up, is that what I heard repeatedly is the idea of partnering. And partnering isn't just with your colleagues who are official leaders, but with every learner, to say that this is yours to bring into your world and not just always coming back to me, even though I love doing it. So we're all in this together, and I think that's a good leadership message. Thank you.
Yeah, it truly helps us become a better learning organization, which obviously who can go against that?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Until next time, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.